Many workers stood outside and said they didn't want to go in, but they were forced to go in with the threat that they would lose their monthly wages. Our favourite chain stores promise to give these people help, money and support, but there's only been a trickle. And it's your desire and my desire for cheap, fast fashion that is creating potential death traps for workers throughout Bangladesh.
And obviously it's very difficult when over 1,000 people have died in a single supply chain incident to provide balance. Who do I get to supply the balance? I mean, who thinks that's good? So that is quite difficult. I would also say that we are really have come up against the most extraordinarily brilliant PR campaign by some of the brands. And I will just say this, and I don't want to sound bitter and horrific, but I do think that we don't necessarily know who is working for who, and there's a lot of very highly paid consultants floating around who may or may not have the ear of lots of very influential people. So I think actually the debate a year on from Rana Plaza is rather subdued, despite the brilliant things that we've seen today outside Benetton and Gap, which will live on in the memory for a very, very long time. So congratulations, by the way, to everybody for supporting Fashion Revolution Day in the way that you have, because it's been incredible. So I do think that it has become a little bit difficult to really kind of get through the smoke and the mirrors and find out what is actually happening. And I know that I'm not the only journalist or commentator that feels that way. I do think there is a balance to be struck, however, and I understand that in the aftermath of Rana Plaza, it was very, very important to do two different things. One, not to demonise Bangladesh, and to completely acknowledge the importance of the ready-made garment industry, which, when I hear it from Amin, 76% of GDP or whatever it was. I mean, these are extraordinary figures. All the eggs are in that basket. So for companies to cut and run and preserve reputation at the cost of 4 million workers, that cannot be. So we have to understand why people, activists, labour rights organisations have had to sit down and have been very, very patient, I think, and played a really good game in trying to get those negotiations off the ground. Obviously, it makes my blood boil when those negotiations have been stymied or there have been all sorts of things that have happened last minute. And I do think it's a disgrace that at this juncture we can't say that the compensation pot for $40 million is full, because it's not. I mean, at best guesstimate, we've got $15 million. So that's where I am at the moment. A little bit disillusioned, but very heartened by what has happened today.
I think we should never underestimate how powerful people coming together can be. That's what drove the brands to sign up to the Bangladesh Safety Accord. So over 150 companies all coming forward for the first time and signing up to a legally binding agreement which says they have to do the right thing by their workforces. They have to ensure that there will never be another Rana Plaza again. The factories have to be safe, there have to be ongoing inspections and everything like this. They did not do that voluntarily off their own free will. They did that because of the massive public pressure. We want them to meet standards which ensure decent wages, a living wage to every single worker in their supply chains, proper trade union rights to ensure, as Amin has said, that the workers can organise, they can bargain collectively for better terms and conditions. It's about the British government recognising that companies in the outsourced world of globalised capitalism in the 21st century, they have an absolute responsibility all the way down the supply chain. Just because you've outsourced production doesn't mean you've outsourced responsibility.
Consumers should not choose only the cheap clothes. The consumers should choose and buy the clean clothes. Clean clothes means that where the ensure the safe workplace, where it is ensuring the living wage for the workers, where the workers are getting the better working condition, better life, as well as their freedom of association. and where they are also sharing the profit with the company. I think the consumers now should go in this way, not the cheap clothes, but the clean clothes. Our aim is to ensure the fair wage for the garment workers, to establish their legal rights as well as human rights, and to ensure the safe workplace for the garment workers. This is the biggest industrial sector and it is covering 79% of our total export. That is the reason almost all the time the attitude from the government not to disturb the garment factories. At present you see one-third parliament member. They are either directly or indirectly related to this garments and textile business.
And actually the wearer and the worker are connected, and we need to make those connections. And I've begun to do that over the years, I think, as I've started to see a more complex picture. And I think it's really important also to say that when the high street began, which is really only 30 years ago, I remember reporting on the opening of Next and celebrating the democratization of style for everybody at a price point that was accessible for everybody, so that it wasn't just looking at what was coming from, say, the Paris catwalks and feeling somehow an outsider to that. I never guessed that in such a short period of time that democratization would become such an oppressive regime. And I think that's really important for us all to be able to recognize that the thing we welcomed into our lives has actually kind of run away with itself.
When you're thinking about what makes a good company, one of the commitments they've made through the Ethical Trading Initiative, which most of the high street brands have signed up to, is to pay a living wage, that exact term, a living wage, to all people in their supply chains. And that was a commitment they made many, many years ago, and not a single one has as yet fulfilled that commitment. Not a single one has met that. And if you're talking about a living wage in Bangladesh or in Cambodia or in China, it doesn't add anything to the price of a piece of clothing here. It's a minimal addition.
Now, what is actually happening is that fashion is being transformed away from the beauty of making garments, and it's being turned into a fast-moving consumer goods, which is really no difference to some liquidized soap or whatever. A lot of these companies, they couldn't give a shit what they sell you. They're just selling you stuff, okay? They don't care about fashion. If they could sell you a blue boiler suit, which you would burn afterwards, and they'd still get their margin, they would very, very happily do it. So what we have to transmit is, if you do love fashion and you care about an industry, perhaps you want to work in an industry, you need to have a vision for the future. And the future, I can tell you, is not to generate vast quantities of disposable products for a transnational corporation. It really is not.
I mean, I wonder whether, just sort of deconstructing that for a minute, whether when we look at fashion journalism, it's in service to the mechanisms of selling. So most magazines are only there because of the advertising revenue that they can accrue, and saying what needs to be said to keep advertisers happy. And it's a very different world now to the one that I began, where, as my friend Trish knows, when she started ID magazine 30 years ago, we said to advertisers, just because you're advertising doesn't mean to say we're going to feature your product. And now that is so different, because journalists get told by advertisers what needs to be featured and how to feature it.
In the 10 years between 2000 and 2010, the average price of clothing fell by 25% in this country. Of women's clothing, it fell by 38%. And nothing else I'm buying has fallen by 38%. Everything else has gone up and up and up and up.
we are now taking guidance in terms of almost spiritual and cultural behaviour from corporates. So we don't have a popular culture that seems to be in rebellion and coming up with a kind of counter-culture.
Companies like PeopleTree are amazing in that respect because they hold up a mirror. They hold up a mirror to the mainstream and say, this is what you should be doing. And still they fall short of that.